our normal books, history books, and our normal literary works. So firstly, I would like to welcome all the panelists here. It is lovely to host you, and thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. So without further ado, I'll get started. So my first question is to Anuja ma'am. Ma'am, India is a synonymous country with mythology. What does that word mythology mean to you? What are your thoughts about the rising trend to erase the lines between history and mythology, and a growing need to prove that mythology is history?
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for the question. I agree. I think India and mythology have a very, very close bond, because I think India and mythology, they practically grew up together. And mythology is significant because it represents who we are. It represents our growth, it represents our glory, it represents our longevity. The very heart and soul of being Indian is represented by Indian mythology. As to your question as to the ratio between history and mythology, we were just arguing about it backstage. As far as I am concerned, history has elements of mythology and mythology has elements of history. That is the inescapable fact. So, that is just something we need to remember when we talk about history and mythology. We need to understand that Indian mythology especially is a living organism. I consider it as something which has a life, a heart and soul of its own, because over the years, so many storytellers, so many scholars who worked on it, they put so much of themselves in it. We share it generation after generation after generation. So it's this organism which assimilates the best as well as the worst of every age. And at its heart, it's neutral. It's always giving so much more than it takes. And that is what truly makes Indian mythology as magnificent as it is. We are very, very privileged to have it.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And it is truly true, because mythology has been in our roots for a very long time. So yeah, what you said was very true. Shubha Vilas, sir, would you like to add on to that?
Usually when my publishers use the word mythology or try to use the word mythology in any of my books, I tell them, sorry, you can't. Because none of my books, whatever books I write, though I always write based on the Indian scriptures, I do not allow my publishers to use the word mythology, because I believe that that word mythology is a misnomer. This word was introduced to India by the British Indologists, specifically people like Max Muller, who coined the term mythology, and especially when it came to the Indian scriptures like Ramayana, Mahabharata, etc. And they did it with an agenda. When the Britishers were ruling India, they ruled India in many ways, but they broke India by doing two things. First, by making food a paid commodity. And second, by introducing English education as compulsory. These are the two things that broke India. And when I'm saying English education, what I mean to say is that people who had English education started getting better pay. And because food became a paid commodity, to buy food, you needed more money. And if you need more money, that means you need English education. And now that English education is compulsory, then everybody's understanding of Sanskrit and our traditional Indian languages started decreasing. And therefore, the only books that we could eventually read, at least this generation, I can very clearly, I don't know how many people can read in Hindi also now, Most people in India eventually started reading only English books. And all books that were about Mahabharata, Ramayana or any of our Puranas were written by Western authors who were doing translation from Sanskrit to English. They didn't change the story. They didn't change the story of Ramayana, Mahabharata. They didn't change the story of the Puranas. They only started calling it mythology. And the word mythology comes from the word myth, which means fiction, which means it never happened. But Vyas, in his writing, he calls his work as itihas. The word itihas means as it happened. It does happen. That is what the word itihas means. Now, if I compare the word itihas to the word mythology, where is the connection? There is no connection at all. Max Muller, in fact, he went around India for 4 years. You'll find this, what I'm quoting right now, in the British Gazettes if you look for it. Max Muller went around India 4 years, traveling the length and breadth of India, visiting every city, every village, and every town in India. And after his 4 years of thorough research of traveling around India, he came to the conclusion, when I'm telling you something, you will not believe what he came to the conclusion, but this is there in the British Gazettes. He said, in my opinion, after traveling the length and breadth of India for 4 years, I have come to the understanding that in this country, there are no thieves and there are no dishonest people. Now you might say, is he talking about India? Very same country he's talking about. And the interesting thing is that he concluded by saying, the reason there are no dishonest people or no thieves in India is because these people read Ramayana and Mahabharata. So now, so the introduction of the word mythology was simply to break that faith. So he said, if you want to conquer India, then the only way to conquer India is that destroy faith in every Indian about the Ramayana and Mahabharata. And that's exactly what they did by introducing the word mythology.
Thank you so much, sir. I think that's genuinely true because being from Tamil Nadu, and I don't know how to read in Tamil, I'll be very honest. So what you said is very true. And speaking of Mahabharata and Ramayana, Indian mythology as it is has most of its popular stories from religiously predominant storytelling cultures like Ramayana or Mahabharata. So is it fair to call them Indian mythology, or is it same as Hindu mythology? Can we call Indian and Hindu mythology the same? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, okay. So the word Hindu originated sometime during the Mughal era, when the invaders were trying to enter into India. They came across this belt which was across the Indus River, across the Sindhu River. So they geographically called anyone on this side of the Sindhu River as Sindhus. And this side of the Sindhu River came to be known as Sindhustan. And somehow that word S, the letter S, is like not exactly there in their language. So that's how the word S came to be H, basically. So the Sindhus eventually became Hindus, and Sindhustan became Hindustan. So now, if you look at it, what is Hinduism, or what is the idea of Hindustan? It's a geographical context. So that means anyone who's staying on this side of the Sindhu River, they are all Hindus in that sense. So now if you look at it and I ask you a question, does the question make sense? Correct? So that's my understanding of it. So Ramayana and Mahabharata, they are part of the psyche of the land of India. They are not a part of only the cultural context or the religious context. They are part of the psyche of the country. And because it is a part of the very breadth of the country, any time a movie comes on Ramayana, any time a movie comes on Mahabharata, any time a serial comes on Mahabharata or Ramayana, any time a book comes on Mahabharata or Ramayana, it will get sold. It will get consumed. Because there is so much hunger for it. It's in every Indian's breath, basically. So you can't avoid it. And that's how these scriptures are.
I'm truly amazed. That is a very unique perspective. Thank you so much. Satyarth, so would you like to share your opinion on the same?
Yeah, I would also like to talk about the first question, which because ever since I've written Mahabharata, it's kind of become my pet peeve to talk about history versus mythology. Because while the book has got a lot of love, there is a section, a certain section, that does troll me. Why do you insist on calling this mythology? And of course, like he said, we all have our own personal views about the subject. I just have a very clear response to that. In my mind, the moment you say something is history and not mythology, you are making an instant value judgment where you're placing history above mythology. You're giving history a greater pedestal than mythology, which I think is extremely unfair. History is extremely time-bound. History is within AD and BC. History talks about mortals. So history for me is a very time-bound thing. Mytho is timeless. Mytho cannot be constrained within AD and BC. How do you constrain Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh within AD and BC? How do you do that? They are Sanatan. They are the Parabrahman. It is mentioned in the Puranas that the Parabrahman have no beginning and no end. So when something has no beginning and no end, how can it be bound within the shackles of history? So that is one of the things that I don't understand that. Also, when you say, historians, I respect the discipline a lot, but history, I feel, has a certain sense of arrogance because history says, I know. And how do I know? Because I have evidence to prove. History is always based on evidence. Mytho doesn't demand evidence, it only demands your faith. It only demands your vishwas. It does not ask for any sort of praman. So I don't have evidence to prove that the Ganga fell on the head of Shiva. I have no evidence to prove that. But I believe in that image because when I hear that story, it gives me goosebumps. When I see that spectacle, what is the wisdom that I'm gaining from that? For me, that is more important. What is the wisdom? What is the learning that I'm taking from that particular story? It doesn't matter whether it happened, doesn't happen in history or mytho. How does it impact me and my life? And how does it impact the world around me? That I think is more important. So that is my take on history and mythology. And as to what, I think he beautifully answered your second question. India is, and if we are equating mythology with religion, then India is multi-religious. India has so many religions. So how can Hindu mythology be Indian mythology? Then we also need to include Buddhist mythology. We should also include Jain mythology. We should also include Islamic mythology. They're all a part of Indian mythology then. In fact, I don't know how many people know, one of the churches in Kerala is believed to be the oldest mosque of the world. How many of us know that? How many of us know that in the 18th century, a Tamil writer wrote a book called the Sira Puranam, which is actually about the life of Prophet Muhammad. How many of us know that in Bengal, there was a writer who wrote a book called the Nabi Vansham, which talks about the dynasty of the prophets of Islam. So all that has not come to us, that has not somehow been a part of our mainstream. I think also partially also because within Islam itself there are rules which prohibit visual depiction of gods. So while you can have 10 serials and 10 movies about all the gods of Hinduism, you could not do that in Islam. So that I think is a huge also responsible why it has not entered our mainstream. But definitely if you talk about Indian mythology, you have to include every mythology. It has to be a plurality of voices, it has to be a polyphony, it cannot be a monolith.
Understood. Thank you, sir. Anuja ma'am, the study of history and mythology are both vast and dynamic practices. Each region, each linguistic group, and each community have their own various interpretation and local narratives. How do you, as authors, create your storylines when there is a plethora of information and perspectives to choose from? So how do you shoulder the responsibility of inclusion and how do you carry on that task?
So again, we're coming back to what is history, what is mythology, and how I treat both the material. So whether you're taking history, whether you're taking mythology, research is very, very important. And when you do the research, you realize something that whether history is given more value, we see it as something set in stone. We say this happened. And I always find that to be extremely presumptuous. I don't mean to insult the historians, the scholars, but I find it very presumptuous to say I know exactly what happened centuries ago. I mean, in today's world, we can't agree on anything. We have our cameras everywhere, privacy is dead, it's all on record, and yet we don't agree on anything. We do not agree on a universal truth. Even this conversation we are having now, you will have a take on it, he'll have a take on it, the audience will get something out of it. There will be no, unanimous agreement. So how can we claim this is exactly what happened? This is what this king thought. This is what his intentions were. So I find it extremely presumptuous. And whether you research history or mythology, you will find that we have forgotten so much more than we remember. Because memory is an extremely fallible thing, and you will find these gaps in the narrative. You will find certain inconsistencies. You will find contrary, narratives from the same period. So how, I think as an author, when I'm trying to put it all together, and I'm trying to create this flow, create some cohesion from this incoherent material, I think a bit of creative liberty gets taken. And with me, again, I try not to think of it in terms of this is the truth, this is false. this happened, this did not. I try not to approach it that way. For me, it all boils down to the essence of what has been conveyed over the ages. It's about getting to the heart of a legend or a myth or a historical incident. So I just try to recreate that, and I try not to control the flow. I try to be a part of the flow. Because this has been around, all these stories, I see it strictly in terms of stories, whether it's history or mythology, the stories are more important. They are stories, and in India we kill each other over the stories. It's sad, but we care so deeply. Love and hate are two sides of the same coin, right? So it's lovely that we care so much, but we shouldn't care too much because they are stories. Because they're stories, you need to remember that. And every story has a life of its own. And it's been passed on. We have this beautiful oral tradition of storytelling here, which I think is very integral to why the stories have survived despite so many attempts by the invaders to wipe it all out. To wipe out our identity. I think that's where the beauty of the stories of Indian mythology lies, that it doesn't need us to help it survive. That it will survive anyway, and we are lucky to be part of the process. So I try to stay out of my way. I try to let the story take shape, and it is true that I use creative liberties, but I try to fit it to a larger narrative, which is bigger than any kind of political or religious agenda. So that way I hope to stay true to this material, which I have the utmost respect and love for. I just want that conveyed mainly.
It's interesting what you asked because, when I was writing Mahabharata, I was reading all the Puranas. What was fascinating for me was to enter this world of the Puranas and discover that there are so many different versions of the same stories. So there is no consensus on any particular story. The same story will have a different version in a Vishnu Puran, a different version in a Shiv Puran, a different version in a Brahma Puran. So for me, what was extremely fascinating was here is something that was created thousands of years back. And what is it teaching us? It is teaching us the plurality of voices, that we need to have a polyphony. We need to celebrate heteroglossia. Plurality is what needs to be embraced. Every narrative has a place. So today in the country, when we are being told that there is this one grand narrative that we must adhere to, and every other narrative is false or dangerous, look what the Puranas are telling us, that no, it is about embracing, being tolerant of every narrative, and being embracing of every narrative is so important. One of the most famous images of the Puranas is that of the Ardhanarishwara, where you have the man and the woman coming together. Now, on a biological level, it is of course the coming of the male and the female principles, which then create the universe. But whenever I see that image, for me, I find a much deeper meaning. It resonates more deeply with me because what I see is that if you have one narrative, it is imperative to have a counter-narrative. Because only when there are two narratives that come together, only then can there be a third and a new narrative, and that is how you will keep evolving. If you stick to one narrative, you will never evolve. So if there is Vad, there has to be Vivad. And only if there is Vad and Vivad, can then together they can create Samvad. And that is how you take the evolution forward. So that is very important to understand the plurality and polyphony of voices.
Agreed, sir. Like Nam was telling, a story is the soul of any book, and without a story and without its soul, the book won't give the meaning that it actually wants to give. And like you said, without debates and without any opposition, we won't come with anything that is concrete. So, Shubha Vilas, sir, would you also like to add?
Yeah, I think they brought out some really nice points. I'll probably add a little bit to what they have already mentioned and kind of help us understand a little bit more better. One is history, according to the modern way of narration, is linear, but Vedic history is cyclic. So that means the same story occurs again and again. The Ramayana has happened thousands of years before. It will happen again after a few thousand years. So these stories are cyclic in nature. So if you look at any of the, like for example, the Vedic scriptures talk about the four yugas, Satya, Treta, Dwapar and Kali. So then after Kali there is again a Dwapar. So that means after annihilation there is again creation. So because the nature of history according to Vedic scriptures is cyclic, it might seem to be, we might kind of get confused between linear history and cyclic history. So when we are saying that we are talking about mythology being history, We're talking about the cyclic history and not the linear history, which is very debatable and which is very, mistakable many times. And as far as the understanding of how these scriptures are written and lived by, it's such an amazing thing. Just like Anuja was saying, that there is so much that you can learn from these stories. These stories are so fascinating, so amazing. Every story can grip you, and every story can enlighten you, and at the same time entertain you. I'm going to tell you one story, and from that one story, I want to help you understand a concept that will really help you in your lives. In the Mahabharata, there is a very interesting small story that comes, which I'll share with all of you. When Krishna is talking with Kunti, just before the Mahabharata war begins, Krishna has come as a peace messenger to Hastinapur, and after that peace message fails, he tries to get Duryodhana to agree to give 5 villages to the Pandavas. When the attempt fails, Krishna goes to Kunti before he goes back. And this is the last meeting between Krishna and Kunti has one chance to convey a message to the Pandavas, to her sons. And Kunti tells Krishna a story. And she tells Krishna, go and tell this story to my son Yudhishthira. And the story she tells is fascinating. She tells Krishna that there was a mother named Vidula. She had a son named Sanjay. And this boy was about 16 years of age when his father died. And Sanjay, so the neighboring kingdom attacked them, and there was a war. And Sanjay was not prepared for the war. He was just 16 years old. But he had to go and fight. And somewhere during the fight, Sanjay lost his confidence. And he ran back, to save his life. He ran back to the fort. And the doors of the fort were closed. And Sanjay was knocking, trying to enter. The doors were just not opening. And from top of the fort, his mother Vidula comes out and she tells him that if you want to come back and if you want the door to open, there are only 2 ways the door will open. Either you come back dead and your dead body can enter the fort, or you come back victorious and you can enter the fort victoriously. Otherwise, don't come back, she tells him. Now Sanjay, he has no option but to go and try again. And this time he fights so madly and so heroically, he eventually wins the fight. And then he comes back. So Kunti tells Krishna to tell this story to her sons, to tell them that if you are going to fight there, don't fight half-hearted. Put your full energy, full enthusiasm in fighting, win and come back. Otherwise, don't come. Now, I just want to stop at this story and look at the story from the point of view of what we can learn from it. India is made up of such mothers. India is made up of mothers who create heroic sons. So as much as the scriptures celebrate the heroism of these warriors, the scriptures celebrate the heroism of the mothers who give birth to these warriors. And when we look at such mothers, and when we actually understand, each one of us sitting here, we owe it to our parents, isn't it? We owe it to our parents for creating who we are today. And a lot of who we are today is simply because of the blessings of those parents. In fact, during leadership courses, when I conduct leadership courses in corporates, one of the things I tell them, when you select a successor for yourself, one of the things that you look for in a successor is find out what is their relationship with their mother. If their relationship with their mother is very strong and very powerful, there is a very good chance that they will be great leaders. And if their relationship with their mother is not so strong and not so powerful, there is a very good chance they will not be great leaders. Therefore, the epics of India not only give us storyline, which may be debatable whether it happened or didn't happen, that's all secondary, but the lessons and the understanding it gives us is so powerful, there is no debate on that.
Agreed, sir. Totally agree. Whether Mahabharata took place or not, it definitely did address so many deep-seated issues and it conveyed so many values that I think even now people abide by in life. What I wanted to ask you was with regards to actually ma'am was telling how she usually approaches her writing and how she balances with the historical facts and her own creative imagination. Similarly, what are the challenges that you usually face when you're writing about, historical figures or mythological figures and, who are beloved and well known? And how do you balance their true nature with your own creative imagination and your own perspective to their characters and the story?
So, when I write books, when I research, when I write, when I speak on the scriptures, I realize that I come from a very traditional background. So as you are seeing, my attire itself shows that, right? But what are the angles of approaching the same stories, or the same characters, the same personalities? One is the very traditional angle. So now if you go by the very traditional angle, youngsters get bored. The modern people, the modern world is not going to understand the traditional approach towards the scriptures. At the same time, the other extreme is completely twisting facts and presenting whatever you want, basically. Now that is not authentic. So one extreme is traditionalists who are too traditional that modern person can't handle it. And then there is ultra-modernists who are so modern that they can twist any character and present any character in any way, which is again not authentic to what the scriptures are saying. So I realized that I don't want to go here and I don't want to go there. I want to stick to the mid path. And the mid path is where I present the scriptures authentically, the characters as they are, but I try to present them with a modern lens. That means how these characters are relevant to me today. It hardly matters to a modern audience who is sitting in this room whether Krishna existed or not. It hardly matters to a modern audience who is sitting over here whether Lakshman existed or not. But what matters is that what they did, does it matter in my life or not? So I have taken that approach towards writing the book, all my books and whatever courses, whatever sessions I do. And in this approach, what I realized is that this is an approach that is very fair to the tradition because it is very authentic and not deviating at all 1 inch. But at the same time, it is very modern in its approach. So every book of mine, you will find the story is intact, but from the story there are lessons that come out that are so powerful. Like in my Ramayana series, I've written a 6-volume series on the Ramayana. Every book of my Ramayana series, I have at least 200 to 300 lessons that you can learn from the story of the Ramayana. So that's the way I write every book. And that's kind of my signature style now. And that's the style I feel that it satisfies both the traditional approach as well as the modern approach towards presenting the scriptures.
I also agree. I mean, when I was writing stories, so when there are 100 stories, the idea was to present the stories, in the most pristine way possible, the way they are in the Puranas. Because, for a lot of the readers, I did realize that this was their first access point in the Puranas. I mean, when Ayan Mukherjee recently launched the book in Bombay, that is what he said. He said, I'm someone, I may not go out and read the Shiv Puran or the Shakti Puran, but I have now got an entry point through Mahabharata, which is the same for all the readers who are loving the book. So since you are presenting this to a new generation of readers who have never experienced the Puranas, I wanted to keep it as undiluted as possible, the stories, because the stories themselves are so fascinating that tampering them in any way would have destroyed the very atma of those stories. So while they are there the most pristine way possible, it is of course the way you narrate the story, because the language had to have a certain dignity. It has to have a certain aura when you're presenting these stories. And I do not have morals at the end of every story. I do not have lessons at the end of every story, because I would not want to impose my learnings on you. I would rather that my readers engage with these stories themselves and draw their own morals and own learning, because these are such subjective stories. I'm sure every person will draw a different learning, a different moral. So I wanted that you engage the stories on your own, on every level as possible, and draw your own conclusions out of it. Because what is wonderful about the Puranas and these stories is that they're so grey. They don't give you a black and white response. Nothing can be said that this is right and this is wrong. They all inhabit a very glorious zone of grey. We talk about 50 shades of grey. The Puranas have 5 million shades of grey. That is what they are. They just, at the end of every story, you're confused. Which path do I choose? Who is right and who is wrong? It does become difficult, and in that scenario, when you engage yourself and when you choose your own path and what you agree with, then that becomes a very fascinating exercise, which Mahabharata allows you to do stories.
That's actually fascinating. Like to add something?
Yeah, for me, actually, originally, I think my childhood became a very magical, beautiful place because of my love for stories. And we were talking about whether Krishna is real or not, and we said it's not relevant. For me personally, I used to have the night terrors, maybe as 1.5, 2-year-old. And mom switches off the light and I freak out and I say, Ma, I'm scared. And there was a beautiful painting of baby Krishna in a room, and I'll say, if the light is off, he's still there. So, at that age, you take everything literally. So, my childhood, I grew up, yelling at Krishna. We weren't like those best friends where it was all sunshine and rainbows. At night, I'd say, I'm scared, and I'm like asking you to make me feel better, and you never show up. You never respond. You suck. You're a horrible best friend. So he was like that for me, and it's still like that in a strange sort of way. So for me, he's always been a part of my life, and that's something that's very meaningful to me. And I just realized I wanted to give something back to the stories which had given so much to me, and I wanted to be a part of that process of storytelling, that thing which I love so much about India, and how, I mentioned this already, how the stories survive despite the best attempts to destroy them. And there's a beautiful reciprocity in this relationship I have with the stories and the characters. I always think at the end of a book, I feel hollowed out, empty, drained. I feel I've given everything. But it's sort of like you give everything and you get so much back. Every book I've written has opened doors for me. I'm from a very, very conservative part of South India, and there are times when I feel claustrophobic, that I've been held back, that I've been boxed in. But through these stories, they've taken me to so many places, helped me to meet so many interesting people. They've helped me live with a modicum of grace, to deal with life's issues. So I just want to share that. And when you share, people share back with you. So I love that this is such a mutually fulfilling relationship. It's what you want every marriage to be. So, that's it for me.
Mom, I actually agree, because even myself as a child, I used to believe in God, and my mom used to tell the same line. Since I'm also from Chennai, I think it's going to do that. But I think every parent has told the same line, Bhagwan ko mano, and he's there for you, but don't worry. I think that one aspect we can see that mythology, whether it's true or not, whether people believe or not, it has actually cast a sort of belief in people, a person they can look up to, and someone they can depend on. Which actually comes to my next question. Actually, I read your book Mohini, and I was very inspired by the strength of the character. So, and I noticed that it's not only in one of your books, but in most of your books, the female protagonist is actually very strong. So I just wanted to know if there is a particular folk tales about Mohini which you have not covered in the book, and what actually drew you to her, or even drew you to Ganga for that matter. Like, what drew you to write about these mythological characters in such a strong way in specific?
I do like, I'm drawn to strong female characters. I'm drawn to, I don't want to limit it to the binaries of gender and bring it down to male and female. I've always felt it's too simplistic, because even if I write a book on a, traditionally male god, if it's a book on Kartikeya, my Kartikeya is a feminist also. He is, because that's how I see, these are strong, interesting, unconventional characters, and Mohini really fascinated me because she's obviously, the female avatar of Vishnu. And Vishnu's 10 avatars, there was so much he achieved using each of these avatars, and I love that he felt that there was something which only a feminine energy could bring to the table. It isn't always about, most of the avatars, it ends with bloodshed. A lot of bloodshed, and oceans of blood is spilled, and yes, destruction has to happen for creation to take place. But I love that when Mohini shows up, it's something a little bit more, there's a little bit more finesse to her, that she uses love, she uses desire as a very, very potent weapon, and it's desire is something we have villainized. I've also written a book on Kamadeva, and this desire is a beautiful thing which gives life so much of its flavor. And yet we impose so much restrictions on desire. There are the love laws which tell you who you should love and how much you should love them. And it just interested me that our Puranas, our Itihasas, they were light years ahead of their time. So inclusive that they actually, it's very matter of fact when you do the research for Mohini, that they consider gender as well as sexuality to be fluid. It wasn't something which you boxed, those labels which we're so obsessed with today. He, she, they, them. It wasn't like that. They talk of gender as something that's constantly evolving. So that was something very beautiful which I explored here. And you talk about Krishna's Ras Leela and his gift of love and desire basically. So when I was doing research for Mohini, I found that Shiva, there are legends from the Padma Purana which suggest that Shiva as well as Arjuna were so enamored of this Ras Leela that they approached him as friends and they said that they would like to explore it too. And they say that they did take on a feminine avatar to experience the beauty of love. So this is not something which we talk about much, and we should talk about it because love makes the world go round. So my characters are all about this, they are not defined by the limitations which define us. They are not bound by the rules and laws of petty civilization. They transcend, and through them I transcend these limitations because sometimes I worry that I'm the sum total of all my fears and insecurities. So I think through writing, through the stories, you transcend and you be a better version of yourself, a more complete sum of all your parts. And I think my readers also come back saying that, that they start looking at the world a little differently. I told you there's a lot of sharing which happens, and it's a beautiful thing.
Definitely, ma'am. Because at the end of the day, it's the author and the way they put the book that decide how the message is conveyed to the readers. Satyarth sir, what was the most challenging aspects of rewriting your book Mahabharata? Because you mentioned it and you mentioned how it covers Puranas, and I think it covers around 100 Puranas, and I think took a lot of effort to rewrite it. So how was the entire process? Because we can see that Puranas are not very well known, at least in the modern world, and they have generally lost touch with our past roots. So how did you go about it, and why did you choose only 100 Puranas in specific?
No, there are 100 Puranas. These are 100 stories from the Puranas. There are not 100 Puranas. The accepted number is 36. It is believed to be that there are 80 Mahapuranas and there are 80 Upa-Puranas. So though even despite that there are a lot of other minor Puranas as well, but this is the more acceptable number. And so I went through it. I mean, Mahabharata has been a labor of love for over 5 years. Then I read as many Puranas as possible. I mean, I unfortunately cannot read Sanskrit, so I can rely on the English translation that were available. And there are quite a lot, thankfully, that I was able to explore. And so that is how I entered this world, and just found myself surrounded by a staggering world, a staggering universe to enter, the kind of writings that exist, the kind of spectacles that have been created by these writers thousands of years back, the kind of imagination I actually talked about. It is so true, that the Puranas actually celebrate the third gender. There is a story in the Puranas of a character called Budh. Now, Budh, if I give you a little background, so the gods have a guru and the demons have a guru. So the guru of the gods is called Brihaspati, and Brihaspati is married to Tara. But unfortunately, Brihaspati is so caught up in his job and in his yajnas and havans that Tara remains a physically unsatisfied woman in her marriage. And so Tara elopes and has an affair with Chandra, the moon god. And they stay together for a very long time. And these are stories thousands of years back. And when Brihaspati comes and demands his wife back, Tara says, no, I love Chandra more, I'm more happier in this arrangement, I'll stick to this. And then there's a war that happens. At the end of the war, I'm not going to the entire story, at the end of the war, the gods decide that Moon has to give Tara back to Brihaspati, which he does, because the Shiva comes and commands him, and no one can refuse Shiva, especially when the moon was saved by Shiva and he stays on his head as Chandrasekhar, so he accepts. But the problem now is that Tara is pregnant and she's carrying Moon's child, and then the debate goes who's the father, and then the gods unanimously decide that since Tara is married to Brihaspati, he will be considered as Brihaspati's son. Brihaspati is of course not happy with the arrangement, so while he accepts it very grudgingly, he gives a curse to that fetus in Tara's womb that when you take birth, you will have no gender. You will neither be male nor will you be female. So when Budh is born, he is born a neuter. And then Budh later on marries someone called Ila. Ila used to be a man called Sudyumna, who had by mistake entered a forest, which was where Shiva had created this Maya, that whoever enters this forest will become a woman. So when this king enters the forest, he becomes a woman. And then he tells Shiva, but I am a king, my subjects need me, I cannot become a woman all of a sudden. So Shiva modifies his curse and says, fine, you will then keep shifting from one gender to the other. So for 1 month you will remain a man, and the other month you will become a woman. So Sudyamna becomes Ila. So on one hand we have Bud, who has no gender. The other hand you have Ila and Sudyamna, who have both the genders. And this is writing that has been done thousands of years ago. So that is exactly what the Purana, it's fascinating. The kind of women's stories, you mentioned women's stories, that is a story of someone called Swaha, that everybody has fallen in love with. Even I discovered the story for the very first time. So it so happens that all the gods come to Brahma and they are extremely famished. And Brahma says, how is that possible? I have created a very simple arrangement that whenever there are yagyas on earth, and wherever you pour something in that yagya, Agni is supposed to make the transfer and bring those oblations up to heaven, which is how you are fed. Agni says, I'm sorry, I don't seem to have the power to make that transfer possible. So then Brahma creates someone called Swaha, a Devi, and she gives Agni the power that from now on, I will be the conduit through which that transfer will be possible. So imagine these male alpha gods standing helpless and famished, and they are saved by a Devi called Swaha. And Brahma makes a rule that from now on, whenever a yajna happens, every line must end with the word Swaha. Only when the word Swaha is uttered will the oblations reach heaven. So there are so many stories like that in the Puranas, and it's fascinating to write about.
Agreed, sir. This is truly fascinating. This story about I'm already very intrigued.
Why very important, please read your wisdom, your heritage. It just contains amazing stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it actually solves half the problems that I think we are facing in the current world. Because right now, gender equality and even LGBTQ, everything is an issue. And now, when we see that our historical notes actually consist of solution to all of this, it's genuinely surprising. Shubha sir, actually, your work often contains ethical and moral dimensions of both Indian history and mythology. Especially in your book Ancient Wisdom to Elevate Your Mind, it usually imparts values to the readers, and it is a pretty sensitive and knowledgeable topic. How do you exactly approach these complex and sometimes sensitive themes in your writing, and how do they basically shape your entire book and help us in understanding the past?
I spend a lot of time with people. So almost on a daily basis, I'm doing events, I'm doing courses, I'm doing sessions where I'm interacting with human beings all the time. So in a typical year, I meet at least a few thousand people. And because I interact with people, and I not just interact with them like on a public forum like this, but I actually spend time with people on a one-to-one basis. I spend a lot of time counseling people, I spend a lot of time guiding people, I spend a lot of time having personal discussions with people. And that's when I understand what people are going through in their lives. The number of hours I spend talking to people and understanding their problems and understanding what they're going through in their lives, that helps me shape my narratives. So every book that I write, like this book, Ancient Wisdom to Elevate the Mind, is a combination of 50 stories from Indian scriptures, various scriptures. And each story talks about one problem that you can deal with using these stories. I wrote another book called Open Mind Meditations. This book again is a combination of so many very interesting episodes from the Ramayana, Mahabharata, the Bhagavatam, etc. And each episode talks about how you can deal with one issue in your life. And that's exactly how I feel that these scriptures can be made relevant. So what I try to do is that whenever I come across any situation that somebody is going through in their life, they're struggling to understand and deal with it, I write something on it. And that's how my books have been shaped. So I would say that these books are shaped out of my concern for people, and when I look at my concern for human beings, I look at it through the lens of Ramayana, Mahabharata, through the lens of the Puranas, through the lens of the Bhagavad. So when I look at it through the lens of these scriptures, the scriptures give me some solutions that are right in the normal books. And I personally feel that these books are very powerful because it can actually help a modern mind. Like, we are all looking for self-help books, right? All over the world, self-help books are such a phenomenon. I always tell people the best self-help book is Ramayana, Mahabharata. The only problem, the reality is that every single problem we have in life has a solution in our scriptures. The only problem is, how do you find it? So what I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to make that process, finding the solution to the scriptures, very easy and almost spoon-fed. So if you pick up a book of mine, you read 2 pages, you will actually get something fascinating for your own life.
Understood, sir. Yes, and I think that is one thing we can take from all the conversations that we had from all three of you, that when we see about the present day problems that we are facing, I think the solution to all of it actually lies in our history, whether we believe it to be true or not. I mean, it does play a big role in all our lives, and I think we should accept that. Now, I actually have a fun question for all of you. So, who is your favorite historical or mythological character, and why?
One of my favorite characters in our scriptures is Jatayu. There's a vulture named Jatayu who comes in the Ramayana, and he comes to the right point in the Ramayana where Sita is being kidnapped. So now Jatayu, obviously many people they feel that how can a vulture talk and how can all that happen. I don't care about that, but I'm looking at what he did. I find what he did amazing. In today's time, when somebody is in trouble, what do most people do? They take out their camera and start shooting, isn't it? If somebody is in big trouble, instead of going and helping that person who's in trouble, people actually start trying to make videos of it. They actually start enjoying that, isn't it? That's so sad. And here is a person who in the scriptures is a vulture, 60,000-year-old vulture, very frail, very fragile, hardly have any strength. But he dared to go and fight with Ravan when he saw that some injustice is being done towards Sita. I find that is the most powerful thing that you can learn from these characters, because of the nature of sacrifice is something that touches the heart. So I personally feel that personalities like Jatayu, so like there's one very interesting understanding that the Ramayana gives. Ravan, he was an astrologer. So for everything he consulted astrology. He also checked astrologically what is the right time to do kidnapping. Imagine, according to him, there is a particular muhurta known as Vinda Muhurta. If someone loses something in Vinda Muhurta, there's a good chance you won't get it back. Like if you lose your mobile phone in Vinda Muhurta, there's a good chance you won't get the mobile back, So Ravan kidnapped Sita in Vinda Muhurta. And now apparently, suddenly as Ravan kidnapped, Jatayu attacked. So many people don't understand what is the logic behind Jatayu's attack. Jatayu fought with Ravan for 48 minutes. And purposely, because Jatayu also knew astrology. He fought for 48 minutes till the Muhurta changed from Vinda Muhurta to it became what is known as Punarvasu Muhurta. And according to Punarvasu Muhurta, if you lose something, you get it back. So that is Jatayu's contribution to the Ramayana. So apparently it seems Ravan won and Jatayu lost, but actually we see it this way, Jatayu won and Ravan lost.
Thank you, sir. Satyarth sir, what about you?
So while writing Mahabharata and going through the Purans, I think what really fascinated me the most was, I think, Lord Vishnu. I was just completely mesmerized by, and the reason for that is, for some reason, Lord Brahma has very restricted space in the Puranas. And Mahadev, Mahadev is a free spirit. He basically loves being on his own, being a hermit or an ascetic. He generally does not engage with the world. He stays in his own meditation, he's exactly doing that. Which is why the entire load of preservation falls on Vishnu's shoulders. Which is why Brahma is called the creator and Shiva is a destroyer, but Vishnu is the preserver. And what is fascinating about Vishnu is that in every yuga, he goes out to do the greater good. As a preserver, that is his param dharma. And in every case, he's cursed, and he accepts every curse with folded hands. So once it happens when he has to kill someone called Kavya Mata, because Kavya Mata is protecting the asuras. So very reluctantly, he has to kill Kavya Mata so that he can kill the demons. Now what he's doing is justified. But Kavya Mata's husband, Brigu, comes and curses Vishnu that because of what you did, you will take birth as human. And you will experience every human emotion that we humans go through. And hence, he's supposed to have taken birth as Ram and Krishna and undergone human emotions. Then another story, after that, he's again cursed when he has to kill someone called Jalandhar. Jalandhar is a demon and his wife Vrinda is devoted to Vishnu. And Vrinda's piety is supposed to give Jalandhar his power. So when the gods decide how do we destroy Jalandhar, the only way to do that is that Vrinda's purity has to be defiled. And so they send Vishnu to do it. So imagine the god has to betray his own devotee, but again, it is for the greater good. So when he does that, Vrinda curses Vishnu, that how could you do this to me? So I curse you that the way you have separated me from my loved one, you will also be separated from your loved one. So that is connected to the Ram and Sita story, where Sita must be separated from Ram because that curse then takes place there. And when Vishnu again takes birth as Krishna in Dwapar Yuga, Gandhari curses him because it is because of you that my 100 sons were killed. Again he did that for Jan Kalyan, for the greater good, but again he is cursed. And every time Vishnu accepts every curse with folded hands. So we say that Mahadev ने विश किया जन कल्याण के लिए एक बार विश किया, विष्णु ने बार बार विश किया because of जन कल्याण. So I find Vishnu very very fast.
Is the love of my life. I know there are lots of Karna fans nowadays who say stuff like he's the child of privilege and he's a brat, he's arrogant. Maybe everyone has flaws, yes. But for me, Arjuna is somebody who always. It wasn't like he was blessed with blazing natural talent, but he was not someone to be complacent about it. He worked his butt off to get to where he felt he needed to be. He worked so hard, and then when he couldn't work harder, he pushed himself even more. He practiced through the night. This was what, and it wasn't like his entire life he was, living in luxury. He had to beg for food when he and his brothers were living in exile. And he did that with equanimity. He did that too. And even then, he did not stop striving to be the best version of himself. I find that very, very inspiring about Arjuna. And another beautiful thing about Arjuna was his kindness. I noticed that strength, might, valor, these are things which we value in men. Everyone likes the badasses. That's why Virat Kohli is as popular as he is. But Arjuna was kind. He was the rare man who knew how to moderate his strength. There was no one he turned down when they approached him for help. He actually risked he went to exile for 14 years because a farmer asked help in retrieving his cattle. He disturbed Yudhishthira and Draupadi while they were together, and the agreement was that when Draupadi was with one brother, the other brothers must respect their privacy and not violate it. But for Arjuna, it meant helping someone meant more to him. So these are the aspects of Arjuna which people kind of skim over when they dismiss him as arrogant and privileged. And again with women, he was kind to them. He was kind.